Autumn story. There are all sorts of surprising things that can happen in life, but one of the very biggest is finding out that you're a witch. This happened to Ms. Higgins about this time last year. She had just finished a pile of ironing and was sitting on the sofa enjoying her afternoon cup of tea when suddenly the teaspoon started stirring the sugar in the cup without her lifting a finger. It's true, she had been wishing the tea could stir itself. She was so tired after all the great lumps of housework she'd done that day that she barely had enough energy to pick up the teaspoon. But when wishing the tea could stir itself actually made the tea stir itself, it was an awful shock. If Ms. Higgins hadn't already been flopped on the sofa, then she certainly would have needed to find a seat sharpish. You can't stay standing after a discovery like that. Had Miss Higgins been married, then, of course, she would have called to her husband into the living room immediately and said, "Bill!" or Bob, or Alan, or Howard. "You'll never guess what. I think I've developed magical powers." But Miss Higgins wasn't married. She lived on her own and worked in the local library on Mondays, Thursdays and Friday afternoons, so she didn't end up telling anyone. This, perhaps, was a mistake. The next day was a Sunday, and Miss Higgins went for a short walk, relaxed a bit, and cooked a Sunday roast. After dinner, feeling a bit overexcited, she wiggled her finger around and produced an enormous sherry trifle out of thin air. She wiggled her finger again, and a big spoon started shoveling the trifle into her mouth while she did the Sunday crossword. Halfway through reading 10 across, she had to wiggle her finger a third time to tell the spoon to stop. Too much trifle was making her feel queasy. On Monday, Miss Higgins got up and went to work in the library. There was, she noticed, a small grey cloud bobbing above her head as she walked, but apart from that, it was a lovely day. In the afternoon, a little boy and his mum said they couldn't find the book they were looking for, so Miss Higgins, who enjoyed being helpful, wiggled her finger and, hey presto, the book appeared. It floated in the air for about 3 seconds and then settled on the little boy's head. The little boy burst into tears and his mum said, "Shame on you," to Miss Higgins and made an angry face. They left the book behind and Miss Higgins felt quite embarrassed. On her way home, Miss Higgins realised the cloud above her head was a bit bigger and darker, but she ignored it. She couldn't ignore the woman in front of her, though, whose foot got stuck in a crack in the pavement so that she lost her balance, fell over and dropped her bags of shopping. At first, Miss Higgins was fascinated by what fell out of the bags. 5 boxes of cornflakes, 2 parsnips, a ball of string and some salad cream. What kind of dinner was this woman planning? Then Miss Higgins remembered it was much better to be kind than nosy, so she wiggled her finger and everything hopped back into the bags and invisible hands helped the woman stand up again. The woman glared at Miss Higgins. "Get away from me, witch!" she cried. Miss Higgins gulped and checked to see if anyone was looking. Quite a few people were. When she got to her garden gate, Miss Higgins had to admit that the cloud above her had grown so big that it now covered the roof of her little house as well. And although the autumn evening was fine everywhere else, above Miss Higgins' house there was thunder and rain and a good deal of evil-looking lightning. "For heaven's sake," said Miss Higgins as she dried herself off in her little hall, "if this carries on, everyone will think I'm a bad person, and no one will visit me in this nasty witchy weather." She was wrong about that, though. The next morning, when Miss Higgins tried to switch on her vacuum cleaner, it made a popping noise and transformed into a broom. "I'll never get the carpet clean with that," said Miss Higgins. But then she remembered and smiled. She wiggled her finger and the carpet was clean. Now I've got some spare time, I suppose I should practice flying, she said. She picked up the broom and opened the front door. It was still raining in her garden, although actually today it was raining everywhere else as well. What was more startling was the crowd of angry-looking people standing under their umbrellas outside Miss Higgins' gate. A thin man with a moustache and a horrible tie stepped forward. "Miss Higgins," he shouted above the noise of the rain, "is it true you've turned into a witch?" Miss Higgins was very aware that she was standing in her doorway holding a broomstick and wearing a long black skirt. All her short, colourful skirts were in the washing machine. "Well," she shouted back, "yes, I think so." The crowd of angry-looking people made angry noises to match their faces. "Sorry," she shouted. "The thing is," yelled the thin man, "you were all right before. We quite liked you. But now you're a witch, well, goodness, you'll ruin the good name of this town. No one will want to come here if there's a witch hanging about. That's you, you know. We won't be able to sell our houses or invite important people here to open supermarkets or any of that kind of thing. So you have to go. Just go, please." The crowd broke up and went away. Miss Higgins stood on her doorstep in the rain. She gave a small sigh and said, "Better get my coat." She chose her long, hooded, waterproof one. Then she locked the front door behind her, sat on her broom, wiggled her finger and flew away. She loved flying. Even in the rain, it was the most exciting thing she'd ever done. She didn't think about where she was going, she just flew around. She left the sky above the town and sped off into the countryside. She felt very free and decided finally to throw herself into being a full-on witch. "I'll need a cat," she thought, and with a quick wiggle of her finger, a cat appeared. It was black and skinny, with one green eye and one lilac eye, and was really quite striking. "Handsome boy," said Miss Higgins, and that was what she decided to call him. The Higgins witch and handsome boy flew all day, over hills, above woods, across rivers, through mists. Towards evening, they spotted a small wooden house standing on the edge of a cluster of trees a few miles outside Reading. The Higgins witch nodded to Handsome Boy. "That looks like the kind of place a witch might live in," she said. "Let's see if anyone's home." They landed the broom and knocked on the door of the small wooden house. There was a loud crash and someone inside tutted and said, "Nope, that's not it either." And then the door opened. A smiling, well-built lady of 53, or thereabouts, stood in the doorway. "Hello," she said. "The Higgins witch, isn't it? Come in, come in. Heard all about you. I'm your nearest witch neighbour, you know. The Watson witch, that's me. Sit, sit. Who's this?" "Handsome Boy," said the Higgins witch. "Indeed," said the Watson witch. "I'm fairly new myself, you know. Still trying to get the hang of all these spells and what have you. And yes, I'm your nearest one. There are a lot of us witches, of course, but the vast majority of English ones live in or around Bath and Bristol. Don't ask me why." The Higgins witch smiled, but then, all of a sudden, she wanted to cry. "I got told to leave town," she said. "I don't know where to go." "Of course you don't," said the Watson witch. "That's why I made up the spare room. Stay as long as you like. Stay forever if you want." The Higgins witch burst into tears. "I feel so silly," she said. But really, she had never met with such kindness, and after the day she'd had, and the shock of finding that she'd turned into a witch, she was very emotional. The Watson witch gave her some shepherd's pie, and later produced a bowl of sherry trifle out of thin air. "Oh, I'm not sure I can eat that," said the Higgins witch. So the Watson witch ate most of it, and put the rest in the fridge. There's not really much more to this story, except to say that the Higgins Witch accepted the offer to stay with the Watson Witch, and they made a very good team. It turned out that the Higgins Witch was a natural when it came to making spells, and the Watson Witch was excellent at knowing what was going to happen without anybody telling her, although this made surprise birthday parties quite difficult. Sometimes the Higgins Witch missed her old town. She heard news about it from time to time, like when the shopkeepers there decided to use the cheapest plastic bags because times were hard. The bags broke all the time, and people's shopping kept spilling or cracking or smashing or crunching all over the pavement. It made the Higgins Witch sad because she could easily have helped clear up all the mess, but she knew she wasn't wanted. "No one wants a witch these days," said the Watson Witch. "Did they ever?" said the Higgins Witch. "Think of the fun they're missing," said the Watson Witch. "And the friends," said the Higgins Witch. They raised their goblets of delicious potion. "Two witches," said the Watson Witch. "Two witches," said the Higgins Witch. "And their witchy friends."